Okay, so I guess we can start today's webinar. Just a minute. Yeah, so if you guys have any questions, as usual, you can just type it on the QA, on the chat, or the QA. Use the QA function of Zoom. Also, this webinar would be updated as well on our YouTube page or EnGenius Academy. Let me proceed. So today I'll be discussing about EnGenius case studies, and then focusing on campus Wi-Fi. So basically, I'll give you some information and pointers as well on what you need to take note of when deploying for campus Wi-Fi. I'll be discussing a bit about our features as well, which you can use for campus and education deployments. I'll also glance as well on our UI, so you'd know where to find these functions. And then lastly, I'll be giving you guys an update for EnGenius Cloud, because we have about 6 or 7 updates recently that we have just pushed over to the cloud. Yeah, so for those who are not aware, we actually have a case study website, which you can find on casestudies.engenius.ai. So on this website, let me see if I can open it. Just a minute. Yeah, so on the case study page, you can filter out the categories, whether you want to view the ones on your region, let's say for example Asia Pacific, Europe, or US, and then you can also see what type of case studies there are. So let's say for instance education, so we have quite a few here. Supposedly today we're gonna have a guest speaker to discuss about the education sectors that we have deployed in Malaysia, but sadly they have another event ongoing, so they wouldn't be able to discuss that. But anyways, we have different case studies here, so we list out what type of requirements the customer has, and then we also detail the solution, what models we deployed, and the number as well on the bottom. So some of this may be useful to you, especially if you're deploying for a new type of application. Let's say for example you want to deploy for an ISP or for a government or for some type of event, so you can filter it out and then see how they did the deployment, what models they have used, and what type of solution they offered. So everything would be detailed here. Again, if you need to access this page, you can freely go ahead and access casestudies.engenius.ai. So it's also on our cloud microsite. By the way, the case studies right here is only for EnGenius Cloud. If you want to view case studies for other solutions such as Sky, you may go ahead and go to our partner portal instead. Okay, so for campus Wi-Fi, so how do you start the deployment? What would you need? Let's say you're gonna offer some products to the client, or maybe they have some requirements, but you're not sure which model to position. So usually for campus Wi-Fi, you need to determine how many APs are required, because usually for campuses or universities, they're very large sites. You may need over 100 access points, switches, as well as maybe a gateway as well. So how do you determine how many APs are required, and how do you suggest what model to use? Is it a small area? Is it a function room? Maybe it's their auditorium. Is it a very high density environment? And then what are the features that you would commonly use for campus deployments? So I'll go over them in brief as well. So before planning for campus deployments, usually we need to take note of the following. First is the size of the site. Of course, to determine what AP you need to bring. Do you need an outdoor AP? Do you need an indoor AP? You would need to do ocular inspection. You need to go to the site, or maybe you can request for a map so that you have an overview or an idea on what models to deploy. And then you would assess the number of users. So you have the size of the site, but without the number of users, it's pretty much difficult to guess how many APs you're going to need. Maybe let's say for example for a certain area, 2 access points is more than enough. But then you didn't know that there are like 1,000 users in that area. So 2 might be choked depending on what model you offered. And then after knowing the number of users, you also need to know the bandwidth requirement. So how much bandwidth are they allocating per student or per person? And what type of application will they be running? If it's, let's say, just internet access for maybe emails or daily notifications, then you wouldn't need that much bandwidth. But if they say that, hey, I'm going to need to provide 25 Mbps per person so that they can view 4K videos, or if the application requires heavy bandwidth. Maybe media streaming, or maybe collaboration in terms of doing software. Maybe they have this collaboration through CAD, or maybe for some schools that involves media, maybe they work around with a Photoshop with collaboration, meaning they need to pass over some HD files, movies and videos and pictures over the web. So they're gonna need a lot of bandwidth for that type of collaboration. So it's very important to know the application as well, so that you'd know what AP to propose. Are you gonna propose a Wi-Fi 5 access point? Is it gonna be a 2x2 AP, 4x4 AP? Whether it's indoor or outdoor, I think that's the easy part. The hard part is figuring out how many APs you need to deploy for the number of users and for a particular bandwidth. So usually for the size, it's pretty much easy to address that. But these are the critical parts. Also the critical locations, like I mentioned, auditorium, like how many users will be there and whether they would be using internet services. Maybe one classroom is a lab, where in this lab requires all wireless devices to be connected. So these are the things that you need to take note of when deploying for wireless, apart from, of course, the specifications of the device. So how do you figure that out? How would you know which AP, which model? So we have a lot of tools for EnGenius Cloud. One is through the floor plan view. So for those that are not familiar, we have this floor plan view built in on EnGenius Cloud, in which you can plot a floor plan, and then you can place, for example, the type of walls, the type of obstacles that there are, so that you can estimate the number of APs that you need to deploy. Let me jump into that real quick. Let me just switch over. Hopefully you still have the heat map. Just a minute, let me check. Yeah, so under floor plan view, here you can upload a floor plan of the area. You can upload, you can plot the walls, what type of obstacles there are. Are they made of wood? Is there a glass window? Is there a metal door? And so on and so forth. For the access points, you don't have to actually own or have an access point to see how the signal would propagate. You can plot virtual access points from the list. So all you need to do is add an AP and then select the model in which you want to see how it will look like when you add them. So I think some of our newer AP models are also here in this list. So let's say you want to see how an ECW220S would look like if you add one, or ECW220. So let's say if you plot it there and then click on the configure icon, you can also adjust the transmit power. So maybe here I would set it to 15 dBm. And then apply. From there you can estimate the heat map on either 2.4 or 5 gigahertz radio. So imagine working on this in a bigger map, bigger scale. You can easily see what the RSSI level is for a given area. I'm not sure if you guys see my mouse hovering around, but here, for example, on this spot I get negative 56 dBm. On this area is a bit of a dead spot because of the elevator shaft right here. And then this spot you get about negative 37 dBm. So you can easily see or estimate the coverage of your access points in an area, and determine what transmit power you need to set for the AP. If you're going to do channel planning, you can straight away do it here. But most importantly, how many APs you're going to deploy in an area, you can easily set that here. If you want to export this, you can easily do that through the reporting system. So it includes this on the report as well. So if you want to view 5 gig, you can easily switch between 2.4 and 5 gig. So a similar tool is also available under Partner Portal. We call this the Easy Wi-Fi Planner. So it's almost the same, maybe a bit of difference in the buttons, but essentially you would be able to select our models as well and plan out your deployment so that you can easily present this to the client. Now, heat map is very important to figure out the placement of the access points, what model you're going to deploy, as well as how many you need to deploy. But why do you need to do this for channeling? So another thing that you need to take care of before deployment is wireless interference. So I'll take this time to discuss more about this as well, because it's very important in any type of deployment, not just for campus scenarios. So when we say wireless interference, this is a crosstalk between your access points or third-party devices. So it can be client-to-client interference if they're all on the same channel talking to a single AP. It can be APs, sorry, excuse me. It can be APs in multiple channels, but these channels overlap each other in terms of the frequency range. And Wi-Fi interference can also be caused by non-Wi-Fi devices, such as microwave ovens, analog cameras, drones, cordless phones, etc. Now, there are a lot of ways to avoid Wi-Fi interference, and the best way is, of course, through channel planning, pre-deployment. So, just want to talk a bit about the spectrum first. So, to understand what interference is, I'd like to talk about 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So, on 2.4 gig, depending on what region you are from, mostly you would have 13 channels to select. Some regions they can only select 1 to 11, other regions can select 1 to 14. So on 2.4 in general for Asia Pacific, you have channels 1 to 13, and each channel is spaced apart for about 5 megahertz apart. Now, for access points, wireless devices, if you set your device to, let's say, channel 1, it actually has this coverage. It overlaps between 5 different channels. So 1, 2, 3, as well as channels before this. And then for channel 6, it overlaps between frequencies 2427 to 2447, so that's from channel 4 to channel 8, and then channel 11 spans from channel 9 to channel 13. So the more access points that you have in a given area, so of course you're not just only going to deploy 3 if it's a campus scenario, the more you would be susceptible to interference. So the span of each channel for Wi-Fi is about 20 megahertz, and let's add one more access point in the mix. So here, this AP is on channel 3. You would see this overlap between channels 1, 6, and 3. So that overlap is what we call interference. So when we have interference in a Wi-Fi scenario, you would have a lot of issues on your connection. It can be high latency, slow throughput, or even intermittent connection, depending on how bad the interference is. Now, for 2.4 gigahertz, you can only have a maximum of 4 non-overlapping channels. Of course, there are third-party devices that we cannot control in the area, but the more devices that you have, then the more interference you would have as well. By the way, these slides are also on our certification on EnGenius Academy. So if you want to learn more about that, please feel free to attend our sessions for EnGenius Academy. Now, again, for 2.4 gigahertz, so for example, channel 1, let's say you're going to deploy multiple APs. What are the recommended channels that we advise? So you can deploy channels 1, 5, 9, and 13. Sorry, I missed one slide. So for 2.4 gigahertz, actually you can also increase your channel width. The channel width would mean the scope of your frequency, or some other brands call this channel bonding. So if you set it to 20 megahertz, you would have X amount of speed. If you set it to 40 megahertz, maximum for 2.4, then that would double your wireless speed. But that would come with a lot of caveats. One is, of course, you would be subjected to more interference because look at the channel scope right now. If you set it to 40 megahertz, so on 20, it covers until channel 3 if your AP is set to channel 1. If you set it to 40 megahertz, then that would increase your scope a lot. It would double your throughput, but then you would have less channels to select. In fact, for 2.4, you can only have 2 non-overlapping channels if you set it to 40 megahertz. So normally, I would set the access points only on 20 megahertz channel width for 2.4, and then I would advise to set the APs to either 1, 6, and 11, or if you are allowed to use channel 13, then set it to channels 1, 5, 9, and 13. So in this way, you can have more options in terms of channeling for 2.4. Yeah, for 5 gigahertz, you have more channels to select. So this gives you more freedom to choose different channels and would have less issues. So the only thing that I would worry about when deploying 5 gigahertz are the DFS channels. So that's the blue channels here in between, including the yellow ones. So if your access points are set to DFS channels, this would subject your devices to be in DFS. So DFS means if the access point is, for example, on channel 120 or channel 100 or on channel, let's say, 112, and then it detects a radar equipment nearby or some weather equipment broadcasting on the same frequency, your access point would go into standby, maybe 1 minute or 10 minutes long, depending on what's broadcasting. Now, during that time, your AP would either be forced to go in standby or switch to a different channel if you have 0 DFS. So, what that would mean for client devices connected to your AP is that they would lose connection. So, if you take out DFS, the channel can be very limited on 5 gig. If, let's say, you set your APs to channel to 80 megahertz channel width, meaning the fastest speed possible for our brand for Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6, you would only be limited to 2 channels. So depending on your deployment and the bandwidth requirement, maybe you can reduce your channel width further down to either 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz so that you have more channels to select. But if you're pretty sure that there are no DFS channels or no devices requiring DFS nearby, then you can freely choose the blue channels here in between. So usually I avoid DFS channels when you are deploying near military bases, airports, or naval ports as well, because usually they would have radar equipment or weather equipment that can interfere with your Wi-Fi channels. So how do we do channel planning? So like I mentioned, all we need to do is very simple. You just need to avoid channels that overlap or channels that are exactly the same. So let's say, excuse me, let's say in an area you have a group of 4 access points. So what you can do is either set it to 1611 or 159 and 13. So maybe the deployment area is denser, maybe, or it's a bigger space requiring more number of access points. Then you can play around with the channel a bit. So here, same channeling 159 and 13, but we're trying to avoid APs to be next to each other if they're on the same frequency. So 15913, and then you would notice that I have 2 9s here, but they're at the opposite ends, and 2 1s as well. So 1 and 1 here, it's fine if they're on the same venue, so long as they don't overlap in terms of the frequency. So again, once these 2 overlap, that's where you have your issues with the Wi-Fi. Again, this applies to both 2.4 and 5 gig, by the way. So if, for example, I set this all to channel 1, your APs would have a hard time reaching your clients. All the data and packets would have a hard time traveling over Wi-Fi. The analogy that I usually use is, imagine if these 6 access points are speakers and they're all talking at the same time. Of course, the receiver, the listener, would have a hard time understanding what one person is saying because they're all talking at the same time. So it's the same case for access points and devices. If they're all broadcasting on the same frequency, there would be crosstalk of information. The packets would reach your client in a more difficult way. You would have high latencies, you can have dropouts on the connection, and a lot more issues on the wireless connection. So actually, channel planning is the most critical part in your Wi-Fi deployment. So this is a top view, but what about a horizontal view? Let's say I'm viewing the building from a side. So you also need to worry about vertical penetration. For access points that have external antennas, dipole antennas, the signal propagation is usually just horizontal. But if you're using silly mount access points, usually the penetration can be very good, especially if you increase your transmit power to the maximum. So for access points, usually I don't recommend maxing out the transmit power. Just increase it so that you can cover what your intended coverage area is, your intended site. Don't max it out because that could increase the AP's vulnerability in terms of interference. Maybe there are third-party APs in the vicinity. If it's a commercial building, it's better to lower your transmit power so that your AP would be subjected to less interference. So for vertical deployments, let's say it's a multi-story building. Not only you need to you need to worry about the horizontal level. Let's say 159 and 13 for this floor. On the bottom floor, you also need to avoid having the same channels vertically as well. Excuse me. So, what are the common features that are used by campuses? So, campuses usually are very secure in terms of the data that they have. This can be students' data, this can be the lesson plans that they have, and other information that they have. Maybe they have financial information there as well for the tuition fees. But usually they would have different authentication options depending on the user. So nowadays, a lot of campuses would use Windows Active Directory for the database. This is for the students login, the faculty login. It will all be linked to one database, one server, so that they can access or be on specific VLANs whenever they log in. So you have Google LDAP as well. So nowadays, a lot of campuses are also switching over to the cloud. So Google LDAP is, if I'm not mistaken, one of the leading suppliers right now in terms of directory management systems. And then, of course, you have Microsoft Azure AD as well. So some people also use their own servers. It can be a third-party Radius server, or it can be an open type of Radius server that they customize on their own. But all these functions, all these authentication types are supported under EnGenius Cloud. To know where they are, let me just show you where these authentication options are. So on the cloud, let's say on your SSID side, depending whether you need captive portal or not. So if you go to WPA2 or WPA3 Enterprise, then you would have your different options for authentication. So you have your Radius server if the client is using 802.1x. If they're using Google LDAP, a third-party LDAP service, maybe cloud-based, maybe local as well, Active Directory and Azure AD, so you can easily select from here. Now, if some of your clients would prefer to have a captive portal, like a splash page, you can also have those different options through captive portal as well. So you have your custom Radius here, which would give you more options. And then there's your LDAP system, Active Directory, and Google LDAP. So MyPSK is also quite common in deploying Wi-Fi services. So MyPSK with dynamic VLAN gives the client or the administrator advantages in terms of easily assigning people, even if they only have one SSID. So imagine a campus, they only have one single SSID, but whenever a person logs in with their own password or their own PSK, they can be placed on a specific network through dynamic VLAN. So for instance, here on the back end, let's say either you're doing this on the cloud or you're doing this on your own Radius server. So let's say here Brian, whenever he logs in using this PSK, he'll be brought over to a specific VLAN. So maybe this is the faculty VLAN. And then when Mary and Lucy logs in using their own accounts, they'll be brought into VLAN 40, which maybe is the student VLAN, wherein they can access their student data. So the PSK can also be set with an expiry. So let's say the school year ends at a specific date, the administrator can easily modify that. And the PSKs can be also locked or tied to a specific MAC address. So let's say maybe the tablets are provided by the school, or maybe you allow them to connect with only one single device, a laptop or a tablet. Then you can lock the PSK to a specific MAC address, so that if they try to bring in their own phone to freely browse the internet, they'll be restricted from doing so. So MyPSK and dynamic VLAN can be configured here on the cloud. Let me just show you that real quick. So going back to wireless SSID, and then from here under the WPA2 PSK authentication type, there is a MyPSK option. Wait, let me just disable. Here you go. So for MyPSK, you can either use Cloud Radius users, meaning you can input the users here on the cloud under users here, or you can use your own or existing Radius server for authentication. So let's say the client has an existing Radius server with all the existing usernames and passwords there and VLAN assignments, so we can just redirect there. Okay, so let me just hide this for a while. So EnGenius Security APs are S models, ECW220S and 230S. Also comes with tools that is very useful for campus environments. One of them, like I mentioned a while ago, regarding interference, is zero-weight DFS. So what this would mean is that you can freely choose any DFS channel without having to worry about the issues with DFS, like the standby phase. Because with zero-weight DFS, your access point would actively scan the background. If it detects a radar equipment on the same, let's say, channel as your access point would automatically avoid that channel already, leading to better interaction with clients. So the AP won't stand by; it will just quickly switch to a different channel. And then it also has AirGuard. So AirGuard is very important in campus environments because this can prevent hackers from hacking in your network. It can also prevent clients from using their own router and plugging it onto your network. So we have this feature called Rogue AP Detection, in which if it detects a rogue AP that has an open SSID plug into your network, you would be alerted. So recently we have updated this. I'll talk about that in a bit, so that it would auto-contain the rogue AP. So on auto containment, basically the access point would be blocked from associating clients, and if you have clients connected there, our AirGuard access point will also disconnect those clients to prevent them from latching on to rogue APs. So AirGuard can also detect other items such as evil twins, those that copy your SSID, man-in-the-middle attacks, and radar or RF jamming. So apart from that, for the MSPs, for the system administrators, you have this RF analyzer feature built into the access point, so you can see how the AP's health is. If the channel is very noisy, you can do a quick scan on the current status of your frequency in the area. And then we also have Bluetooth integration if, let's say, the client wants location-based services. So the security APs are equipped with BLE, so that you can also scan non-Wi-Fi devices, let's say Bluetooth devices, so that you can track them where they are, depending on what type of location-based services you have integrated with. So for reporting, we have scheduled reports, which is very useful again for campus environments, because the scheduled reports that we have is customizable, and you can send it on a specific sched. For example, every Monday 9 a.m., the administrator wants to receive a report of the overall health of the device, a summary of the settings, what's my bandwidth consumption, all that information. So you can automatically send that to the admin as well of the campus. So before moving on to the updates, let me just quickly jump over the cloud website again. Excuse me. Okay, so update number 1. So I mentioned that we have recently upgraded our WIPS system for the security APs. So if you are using our ECW220S or ECW230S, you would see there's a new option here for containing rogues. So what this would do is basically contain them. Previously, in the past, if it detects a rogue SSID, you can classify them, but you really can't do anything. It will just alert you that, hey, there may be a rogue AP here. So now we have the option to contain it. So I don't have any rogues here in my area, but if there is, I have the option to contain it. I'm not sure if you can see this, that's grayed out. So what that would happen is that our scanning radio deployed on the security AP would spam this third-party access point with the authentication packets. So what's going to happen there is that if there are clients associated to it, they would get disconnected from the rogue device. If you have AP or clients trying to associate to that rogue AP, let's say they are not familiar that this is a third-party AP and they try to associate, they would be prevented from connecting as well. So essentially, it's going to try to disable that rogue AP from connections, from further connections, so that nobody can latch onto it. So we have two options for rogue SSIDs. You can either automatically contain all rogue devices that are detected in the area, or you can pre-select them. So when you pre-select them, maybe you have legitimate third-party devices that you are using that you want clients to connect to, or maybe it's something that the administration or a different department on your office use. So you can select that and whitelist it. So if you whitelist that device, they wouldn't be attacked by our system and still allow clients to connect there. Okay, second new update that we have is for our new product, the ECW 130. Let me just get over the setting. Okay, so for the ECW 130, this is a Wave 2 Wi-Fi 5 device. So it's a 4x4 Wi-Fi 5 device that comes with two 1 gigabit LAN ports. If you need more than 1 gig as your uplink speed, as your uplink port, then you can do link aggregation for LAN 1 and LAN 2. So what this would do essentially is combine both LANs so that you have a faster uplink. And then of course on the switch side where the AP is connected to, you can just enable link aggregation. So essentially from there you would have about 2 gigabits per second of speed for that access point. If you need internet traffic faster than 1 gig or intranet transfers that are greater than 1 gig, then you can easily adjust that for the ECW 130. Right here it says it's only for the 130 because it's the only access point that we have that has dual LAN. For other models, like other Wi-Fi 6 models like the ECW 230, it's equipped with a 2.5 gigabit LAN port. Okay, another function here that I think a lot of people have requested a lot is the notification of the firmware. So now you can be alerted if ever there's a new firmware for release so that you can adjust or inform your clients ahead that you'll be doing maintenance for an upcoming firmware upgrade. So when upgrading the firmware, we have this option wherein you can select which day you want to update the firmware. You can freely choose which day, but you cannot disable it. The reason behind is updates are usually important, and usually we have security patches for the access points and the switches and the gateway. Now we don't want any device to be left unpatched if ever there are critical updates that are upcoming. So the schedule cannot be disabled, but you can select which specific day is best for the deployment area. So with the notification alert for the firmware, you'd be alerted just before the firmware would undergo that firmware upgrade, so you can easily make adjustments. Another update that we had recently, let me borrow our client's site. Okay, so now we have this identity field under the client list. So identity here means it would display the username of the clients. So in the past, if you want to connect to if you want to monitor your clients, you can see their IP address information, you can see their MAC address information, which AP they connected to, which SSID, but you wouldn't be able to identify them based on their username if let's say you're using Radius authentication or 802.1x. So for some administrators, it would be a lot easier for them to identify these wireless clients if they can see the usernames. So now we added this field right here. If you don't see that option, you can just expand it on your drop-down list and find identity. So identity would mean the identity of the login connection of that wireless device. It would mean they're logged in using Radius or 802.1 authentication. So you can easily track clients from here. A few updates that we have done recently on our gateway excuse me, is the option to apply the firewall rules to all ESGs. So especially if you're working with a lot of ESGs, so let's say you have an organization, maybe under that org you have 5 different ESGs, ESG 510s, maybe one for each branch that you have. If you're applying the same firewall policy for all sites, Instead of doing it one by one, now you can easily apply this to all the ESGs that you have in the organization to make it a lot easier in terms of managing your firewall items. And the last change that we have on the cloud recently is the option to have the client VPN access site-to-site VPN subnets. I'm not sure if I can show you that. Just a minute. Yeah, I don't think I can show you that. Let me just show you a picture instead, just a while. Okay, so if you have site-to-site VPN enabled and then you enable client VPN as well, you would see the option to enable client VPN LAN connection here. So what this would mean is if you have, let's say, sites A, B, and C, and then your client VPN connection connected to site A, they would have access to sites B and C as well. So without this connection, without the client VPN being allowed to connect to your network, essentially if he wants to access sites B and site C, he would have to disconnect from site A and then connect to site B, or disconnect from site B to connect to site C, and so forth. So this would make it a lot simpler if you have a multi-branch setup for a VPN connection. So again, if this client who connected to your ESG on site A and is also linked to other sites using site-to-site VPN, essentially the client can also access the entire network just by connecting to one of them. So of course, this can either be enabled or disabled depending on your setup. Yeah, so that's the updates that we have on the cloud. Let me see if you have any questions. Just a minute. Oh, sorry. I think Nancy wanted to type something in chat. I just read it now, but it's blocked earlier. Nancy, you may go ahead. Excuse me. Okay, one question here under the Q&A function. For ECW 130, let's say I have two ECS 1528 switch that I have uplink directly connected to the switch, AP LAN 1 connected to switch 1, AP LAN 2 connected to switch 2. Is the looping, will there be looping happening? For LACP, is the traffic under active? So if you have, let's say, one access point and then it's connected to two different switches, that can actually work in a backup and redundancy format. So if your switch 1 goes offline, the LAN 2 for ECW 130 would be active and you can connect there. So looping would be prevented by SDP. So if you link aggregate the ports of the ECW 130, is that working under active scenario? So yeah, both ports would be link aggregated, meaning they would work at the same time. And then you can apply anything as usual, VLANs, any type of traffic. And of course, the major benefit would be that you would have more traffic going through those ports, supplying for your ECW 130, or as your downlink as well, going back to your network. Another question here for the identity function, like to identify whether what's the username of the wireless client who connected. Does this fall under the pro license? So yeah, the identity function for the cloud falls under the pro license. Let me just jump back to that real quick. Oh, I'm sorry. Identity information on the client list for EnGenius Cloud to identify what username they logged into is actually part of the basic license as well. So you do not need a pro license to view the identity of the person who logged in. So again, I just want to highlight, for example, identity right here. This is the username of this person. So you don't need a pro license for this function. This is under the basic license as well. What VPN client can I use other than True VPN client? So depending on your system, we have different options that you can use. I believe we have this on our manual on the different options that you can that we have suggested. But for Windows 10 and 11, we highly suggest True because it has been tested by us a lot and it's mostly compatible. But if you are working with any other third-party VPN client, so long as they support IPsec as well as XAuth and XAuth, you should be able to use that as your VPN client. Another question here, when will EnGenius VPN client be released? So we are in the planning stage of releasing our own VPN client to make it easier for clients to link to our ESG 510 without having to rely on third parties. But we don't have the date yet, unfortunately. But once our team have fully tested and developed this program, we would give you a release date as well. Another question here is, can we connect two locations with VPN at the same time? Like for example, A and B or both? Yes, you may. So with the ESG 510, one of its functions is Mesh VPN. So let's say you have 3 sites or 3 branches and then you have 3 ESG 510s. You can have them link automatically through Mesh. They can work or link simultaneously. So that means if I want to access branch A from branch C and branch B at the same time, I can do that without any issues. Depending on the ESG model, right now we have the 510, soon we'll be releasing more. You can have multiple simultaneous tunnels without any issues. So for the ESG 510, the maximum tunnels you can have at the same time or simultaneously is 200 tunnels. Can we get the recording? Yeah. After this session, maybe today or by the end of the week, I'll be uploading the recording on YouTube on our EnGenius APAC page. It would also be available later on under EnGenius Academy as well, under the archived webinars. Hello, good evening, Vanley. Yeah, long time no here as well. Okay, one question here, will the ESG sell in a virtual license? Meaning, can we install the ESG function under AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud? At the moment, we are only selling ESGs as a hardware package. We have a lot of models that we'll be releasing soon, especially higher models, because a lot of people require, for instance, an SFP slot or more ports or faster ports, not just for the LAN but for the WAN side as well. So we'll be releasing bigger boxes in the future. We'll also be releasing rack mountable ESGs as well as a cost-effective version under EnGenius Fit. So do stay tuned for that. So I don't have the full details yet, but please stay tuned. But in terms of the software side of the ESG, we don't have any news for that right now. Okay, another question here is, I believe this is related to the question just now. Do you plan to release a VPN cloud server soon? I think you're also asking about the gateway, which is cloud-based. So not at the moment, but we have a lot of gateways, hardware versions of gateways in store. Okay, another question here. We have a lot of questions about the gateways today. Question is, I want one. There's one question about the VPN access. What's the maximum client access and security? So for the ESG 510, you can have 200 concurrent tunnels. You can set up to 250 users, as well as the security right now is using IPsec. We'll be supporting Open VPN as well in the future. If you need the full specs, you can head over to our website to see the full breakdown on the capacity of the ESG 510 and the future models as well, because we'll be releasing more models, like I mentioned, in the coming months. Okay, there's a question here regarding WAN optimization. Can we do WAN optimization using SD-WAN device? Is that pertaining to traffic or basically WAN balancing or something? Okay, one question here about campus Wi-Fi. So, how do we charge the bill for campus student when they use it? So, we can easily integrate with third-party hotspot gateway services. When you say hotspot gateway services, usually these are companies that focus on user management. Let's say user bandwidth allocation, traffic allocation. Maybe they have different packages per user. So those things they can do on the fly, and we can easily integrate with them as well. So if you have any requirement that requires, let's say, monetization for your campus setting, just let us know so that we can share the few companies we have integrated with. So they are third party, which focuses on, again, user management. But we can bridge you to them if you have that type of requirement. So just let us know. Okay, so WAN traffic optimization, back to the question just now, can we do that using the ESG or the SD-WAN gateways? So we are still working on, let's say, content filtering, traffic applications, but once we have launched those services, then we can let you know as well. But right now, the type of WAN optimization that you can do are mainly on the physical level. For example, if you want to do failover or load balancing between different ISPs, you can do that right now. But in terms of traffic management, we will be updating the SD-WAN gateways to support that soon. Hopefully, we can give you a date soon. Are there any new Wi-Fi 6E models for release for Singapore? Yeah. Actually, we have launched in the past. I think a couple of months back, the ECW 336. So this is a Wi-Fi 6E model which comes with three radios, 2.4, 5 gig, as well as 6 gig. The reason why it's not being sold yet in Singapore is because I think it's IMDA. I'm sorry, I forgot. IMDA have not yet officially allowed the use of 6 gigahertz yet. But once it's official, then this product can be sold in Singapore as well. So essentially, it's a 4x4 device. You can view the full specs on our website. 4x4, 3 radios, again 2.4, 5 gig, as well as 6 gig. And then the maximum speed for 6 gig is 4,800 Mbps. Are there other models to be released apart from the 336? We have a lot of models for release this year. I just cannot announce them yet. But of course, we're gonna be releasing the latest technologies in Wi-Fi. I just can't specifically mention the models now and their specs, but we'll be announcing them over our social media pages as well as over webinars like this as well. Thank you. Okay, one last question here is a follow-up question. Does EnGenius have WAF or router control? Sorry, may I know what you mean by WAF? For router control, we do have routers or gateways or SD-WAN gateways, if that's what you're asking. And these gateways can be configured over the cloud as well. So they fall under EnGenius Cloud. Okay, last question. Is your throughput Mbps based on simplex or duplex? I think what you're asking is for Wi-Fi. So the current technology in Wi-Fi purely works in a simplex format, meaning one way. So the full technology of Wi-Fi still evolves around it right now, even until Wi-Fi 6E. I'm not sure yet about Wi-Fi 7 whether there's going to be a change there. But yeah, for wired it's definitely duplex, but for Wi-Fi it's one way. For this applies to across all brands. But yeah, in terms of the throughput specs that we put, these are based on the actual data rate of the access point. Okay, guys. So again, the recording of this webinar will be posted over our YouTube APAC page as well as on EnGenius Academy. If no further questions, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. I think Nancy have already forwarded the schedule for the rest of the webinars for June. So I hope to see you guys there. Thank you so much. Have a great day.